The 2000s ushered in what some consider to be the golden age of comic book movies. Of course, Superman and Batman had popular movie series long before then, but in 2000, the original X-Men movie released to box office and critical success, kicking off a renaissance of comic book adaptations. We had Sam Raimi's Spider-Man trilogy, Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy, and of course, the birth of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which revolutionized the way crossovers and team-ups were done in films. It seemed like comic book films would be on top of the world for decades to come, but as of this year, we've started to see a decline. Spider-Verse and Guardians 3 did well, but those were the exceptions rather than the rule. Ant-Man, Blue Beetle, The Flash, and Shazam all bombed. Secret Invasion was a massive disappointment, and there's very little excitement surrounding Aquaman 2 and the Marvels. I mean, the MCU is bloated beyond recognition at this point, and Aquaman 2 is part of a dying cinematic universe. Despite the original Aquaman and Captain Marvel films scoring over $1 billion each, they were riding high during the peak of comic book movies. It's hard to imagine either of their sequels making anywhere close to $1 billion this year. In my opinion, comic book adaptations have already peaked, but at the same time that they're declining, we're seeing video game adaptations start to gain momentum. My prediction is that, in 5 years or so, video game shows and movies will take over as the dominant force in mainstream entertainment.
Kinda wins.
There was a time when video game adaptations used to be nothing more than a punchline. In the 1990s, you had the live-action Super Mario Bros., Street Fighter, and Double Dragon movies, all of which were received terribly. The original Mortal Kombat movie from 1995 does still have a cult following, but the effects are very dated, and it neglected the R-rated violence that the game is so well known for. Its sequel is also considered to be one of the worst movies of all time.
You're alive. Too bad you will die.
The 2000s and 2010s didn't fare much better. Sure, there were a couple of adaptations that brought in money, but between Resident Evil, Doom, Assassin's Creed, Hitman, Prince of Persia, and everything made by Uwe Boll, video game adaptations ranged from terrible to just meh. No matter how hard Hollywood tried to make a video game adaptation stick into the collective consciousness of moviegoers, nothing was memorable. But then, in 2019, Detective Pikachu surprised everybody by actually being good. It's not an all-time classic or anything, but it was the first major video game adaptation to get a positive Rotten Tomatoes score, and it grossed over $450 million, becoming the highest-grossing video game movie at the time. It was a loving and respectful tribute to the franchise, making the Pokemon themselves look good, creating a lively world, and generally giving the fans what they would want from a Pokemon movie. In a weird way, this film was groundbreaking by proving that video game movies could be critically and financially well received. Since then, we've gotten 2 successful Sonic movies, an Emmy-nominated Last of Us TV series, a gloriously gory Mortal Kombat film, a fun Uncharted adventure, and the Super Mario Bros. Movie, which proved to be one of the biggest blockbusters of all time. We can see that video game adaptations are starting to gain momentum, and they no longer have the bad reputation that they used to. What's the reason for this shift between comic book and video game movies? Well, I think it's a couple of things. I do believe that superhero fatigue is starting to set in, as well as a lot of confusion and oversaturation when it comes to these cinematic universes. No one wants to have to watch 2 Disney Plus series before seeing a movie, and no one wants to see a movie in a universe that everybody knows is going to be rebooted soon. Video games are also dominating comic books as the more popular medium for entertainment. In 2022, the comic book industry was estimated to be worth about $15.5 billion, a fraction of the $97 billion that the video game industry was worth that year. The golden age of comic books began in 1938 when Superman first took to the skies. Comic books have been a staple of pop culture since then, but they did experience a crash in the 1990s, around the same time video games were starting to become more advanced and more popular. The original PlayStation came out in 1994, then you had the N64, and then the Xbox, and the big three companies of Nintendo, Sony, and Microsoft have built more and more sophisticated systems ever since then. The people who created comic book movies grew up with comic books, and brought that passion onto the screen. The reason video game movies did so poorly in the 90s and 2000s was that they were made by people just looking to capitalize on a popular IP, rather than making these movies out of love and passion, the way comic book movie fans did. But now we're seeing a generational shift, where kids from the 90s who grew up with Mario and Sonic are now the ones involved in the making of these hit movies. YouTuber Brentalfloss predicted this phenomenon all the way back in 2012, and I think he was right on the money.
Comic book movies are better than a majority of video game movies. Why don't producers care enough to, protect these properties, or why don't the creators care enough to protect these properties?
This is just my theory. Is a matter of generation. I was born the year before the NES was available, 2 years after Donkey Kong arrived on the scene. And so, I was in one of the first Nintendo generations where I was born into a world where I didn't know a world without it. And the people that make the decisions about movies and generally have the money and have the power were not part of that generation. They're 40, 50, 60, and maybe they have kids that get into it, but it wasn't that part of their heart. It wasn't part of their childhoods, whereas there's plenty of people that are, old, that were all about comic books in their youth. They sort of get it. So I think that it's just going to be a matter of time before the people in our generation realize, hey, because it's like this. Sometimes you can tell that a filmmaker said, there's this beautiful thing and I'm going to show it to the world and say this is beautiful. And in the way that I show them it is, they will realize it is too. Because producers of these movies sometimes go, what is this thing? I don't know what it is. How do we sell it? What is it? You know what? Get something else. Hey, this looks kind of like it. Okay, watch this. And it's like, that sucks, dude. That's not what it was in the first place. So once somebody gets to the point where there's enough power centered in the generation of people that understand why these things are important to people like us. But they'll figure it out one day when we get to the point where we're, old, the people that are really old now die. And, we all just kind of move up one notch and we're in charge.
This is why we've gotten such faithful adaptations of Sonic, Mario, and Mortal Kombat over the last couple of years. Because they were made by passionate fans who knew how to give the viewing fans exactly what they wanted to see.
That's what we've been waiting for!
It's what we wanted all along!
Video game adaptations have already proven that they can reach a wide audience. We've gotten family films, drama and horror for adults, and movies with fun, mindless action. Franchises like Mario span multiple generations, with 90s kids and today's kids all enjoying it. There's also a number of genres that video game adaptations can tap into, including sci-fi, western, fantasy, and so much more. Comic book films have already played their biggest cards by giving us several different versions of Batman, Superman, Spider-Man, etc. But video game adaptations have only just begun. It's almost a guarantee that we'll get more Mario movies, and between PC gaming and the three big consoles, there are so many other franchises that haven't even been touched yet. Legend of Zelda, Metroid, God of War, Red Dead Redemption, Fallout, hell, even Minecraft. The list goes on and on. While I still think comic book movies can do well in the future, it's far from being a slam dunk like it used to be. In 5 years or so, I think that video game adaptations will start to rule the big and small screens. But that's just my opinion. What do you think? Will video game adaptations dominate the box office in the future? What games would you like to see be made into a show or a movie? Let me know in the comments. Like and subscribe if you enjoy my content, ring that notification bell. Thanks for watching, and I hope y'all have a good one.